Welcome to the Black Anarchist Podcast, a channel where critical thinkers come to learn and grow. Through pedagogical discussions, we challenge the status quo, conventional narratives, and present raw truth. I'm JC, author of Blame It on the Dress, The Manufacturing of Black Homophobia and Performative Masculinity. Today, we're going to discuss my upcoming book, Whose Life Is It? Without the Right to Die, You Don't Actually Own Your Life, which will be released on December 15th. This book exposes the most fundamental violation of human autonomy that exists in our society today. The, the systematic denial of your right to control your own death. I wrote this book because I realized that every other freedom we claim to have is meaningless if we cannot choose when and how our story ends. You are serving a life sentence in a prison you never chose to enter when the crime you committed was being born without your consent, and your punishment is being forced to continue existing regardless of whether you find your existence worth living. Let me be clear about what this book is advocating. This is not just about some abstract philosophical right to die. This is about the right to medical assistance in dying. It's about the right to a humane death. No one should be relegated to blowing their own brains out with a gun or jumping off a roof because those are the only two methods available when medical assistance is criminalized. We all should have the right to medical assistance in dying after a proper medical and mental health evaluation instead of a society making a priori assumptions that anyone who wants to die is incompetent. The system presumes incompetence from the outset rather than conducting a posteriori evaluation based on actual evidence of mental capacity. This reversal violates due process by assuming mental incapacity without proper assessment. The system treats the desire for a peaceful death as inherent evidence of mental illness when it could very well be the most rational response to genuinely unbearable circumstances. People deserve peaceful, dignified, medically supervised death when they determine their suffering is intolerable. They deserve professional medical assistance using pharmaceutical methods that ensure comfort and reliability, not violent, self-directed methods that traumatize families and communities while often failing catastrophically. I initially considered filing a federal lawsuit challenging the criminalization of medical assistance in dying, but I realized that entering their corrupt forum would only legitimize institutions that are fundamentally illegitimate. The federal judiciary is not worthy of hearing our case. They are not neutral arbiters, but active participants in maintaining state control over individual autonomy. Going into their courts would only give them legitimacy they do not deserve while wasting precious time and resources that could be used for actual resistance. These judges are not confused about constitutional interpretation. They are callous enforcers of systematic oppression who understand exactly what they are doing and choose to do it anyway. Federal judges insulated from electoral accountability and granted lifetime tenure consistently prioritize institutional stability over individual liberty, state power over human dignity, and collective comfort over personal autonomy. They serve as sophisticated instruments of social control disguised as guardians of justice. The judiciary's systematic abandonment of the Constitution's clearest protection for individual autonomy proves their illegitimacy. The Ninth Amendment states, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. This amendment is a rule of construction. a directive to the courts on how to interpret the Constitution. It exists precisely because the founding fathers understood that no document could enumerate every natural right possessed by free individuals. But the Supreme Court strategically moved away from enforcing the Ninth Amendment and instead decided to focus on substantive due process rights. This shift fundamentally changed inalienable natural rights into privileges granted by the state. Rather than recognizing rights as natural entitlements that exist independent of government, the court transformed them into grants from the state that can be regulated, limited, and revoked based on competing governmental interests. Under a Ninth Amendment framework, the right to medical assistance in dying would be recognized as a natural right retained by the people, something that the government has no authority to regulate absent explicit constitutional grant of power. Under substantive due process, the same right becomes a liberty interest that must be balanced against state interests and can be overridden when the government demonstrates a sufficiently compelling justification. This semantic shift has profound practical consequences. Natural rights under the Ninth Amendment are presumptively protected, placing the burden on government to justify any interference. Conversely, substantive due process rights are presumptively regulable, placing a burden on individuals to prove they deserve protection. The abandonment of the Ninth Amendment was not accidental. It was a deliberate strategy to expand government authority by framing fundamental rights as state granted privileges. The hypocrisy of governmental authority is perfectly revealed in how the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade. When they overturned that decision, they claimed to be speaking on behalf of the unborn, those who cannot speak for themselves. Yet these same institutions refuse to speak or respect the will of competent adults who are fully capable of speaking for themselves about their own existence. They claim to protect those who have no voice while systematically silencing those who have voices but express preferences that threaten governmental control. This isn't about protecting life. We all have to die at some point, regardless of government preferences. This is about power. The right to control one's own death represents the ultimate threat to government authority because it acknowledges that individuals retain sovereignty over their own existence that cannot be overridden by collective interests. When people can choose when and how to exit, the state loses its fundamental tool of control, the ability to force continued participation regardless of individual consent. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of this system is the comprehensive gaslighting campaign that transformed victims of systematic oppression into grateful recipients of institutional compassion. Society creates unbearable conditions, then, when people express their logical desire to escape those conditions through death, they are told their assessment of their own circumstances is evidence of mental illness rather than rational response to irrational situations. This gaslighting serves to obscure society's role in manufacturing despair while positioning the same institutions that created the problems as compassionate forces trying to solve these problems. When someone becomes suicidal because society has systematically destroyed their economic prospects while treating their failure as evidence of personal inadequacy, they are told the problem is their brain chemistry, not the social system that requires exploitation for success, while punishing those who refuse to exploit others. When someone wants to die because they've been ground down by systems extracting value from their existence while denying them dignity, they are told the problem is their coping skills, not the systematic oppression they've accurately identified. Society's response to expression of suicidal ideation reveals the depth of this control system. Like the game of Monopoly that sends you directly to jail after passing go or collecting $200, the moment someone voices thoughts of suicide, they are immediately and directly sent to a suicide prevention hotline or a mental health professional. Do not pass go, do not collect your dignity, do not engage in rational discussion about your own existence. Just call 988. This conversational quarantine serves multiple functions for society. It allows people to avoid confronting the uncomfortable reality that someone they know has concluded that existence has become unbearable. Rather than examining whether the person's circumstances might actually warrant such a conclusion, society can simply declare the conversation off limits and redirect responsibility to professionals. They don't have to think about whether the person might actually be right. But the government's attempt to control death reveals something crucial. Government is not God. Death is the one thing that even the most powerful government cannot control. Everyone will die regardless of legislative preferences, judicial decisions, or executive orders. The government's prohibition of medical assistance doesn't prevent death. It only ensures that inevitable deaths occur through violence, trauma, and maximum suffering rather than peaceful medical procedures. The government is acting ultra vires, beyond the scope of legitimate government authority, when it prohibits competent adults from ending their own lives or seeking assistance in doing so. Under our constitutional system, government possesses only those powers explicitly granted to it. Nowhere in the Constitution is government granted the authority to prevent competent adults from controlling their own mortality. The right to medical assistance in dying exists beyond governmental reach because it flows from natural rights that predate government itself and remain independent of governmental recognition. The public will never save you because acknowledging that some people have legitimate reasons for wanting to die would require them to confront their own complicity in creating unbearable conditions. They would have to admit their celebration of every birth might have been premature, that their insistence on hope and recovery might have been forms of emotional violence against those whose experience contradicted these optimistic assumptions, and that their opposition to the right to die might have caused enormous unnecessary suffering. Most people simply don't care about your suffering because caring would threaten their comfortable worldview. It is psychologically easier to pathologize victims than examine victimization, more comfortable to offer therapy than address systemic causes, less threatening to maintain that all suffering can be medicated than acknowledging that some suffering results from immoral social arrangements that benefit those with power to change them. The right to medical assistance in dying represents the most fundamental human right because it is the foundation of all other freedoms. It is the ultimate expression of self ownership and the right to opt out of the social contract when the contract no longer serves their interests. When Jean Jacques Rousseau wrote about the social contract, he understood that legitimate government exists only through the ongoing consent of the government. But Rousseau also wrote something that reveals the tyrannical potential of collective authority. To protect the social compact from being a mere empty formula, it silently includes the undertaking that anyone who refuses to obey the general will is to be compelled to do so by the whole body. This means nothing less than each individual will be forced to be free. If you guys read the social contract, this is what he says. The sovereign has a duty to force individuals to be free when they can no longer comply with the social contract. American governments have perverted Rousseau's framework by forcing people to be free when they violate others' rights, but when they simply wish to withdraw from the social contract entirely. Instead of compelling compliance from rights violators, they force law abiding citizens to remain trapped in systems that serve others' interests rather than their own interests. Instead of providing meaningful exit options for those who find the social contract unbearable, they criminalize the most fundamental exit of all: peaceful death chosen by competent adults who prefer it to continued subjugation. But consent becomes meaningless when it cannot be withdrawn. When you cannot choose to exit entirely, including through peaceful death, when existence becomes unbearable, then every other choice you make occurs under duress. This elimination of exit rights corrupts every aspect of political participation. The right to die serves as the foundation for all other rights because it ensures that continued participation represents genuine consent rather than submission to eliminated. Let me read that sentence over again. The right to die serves as the foundation for all other rights because it ensures that continued participation represents genuine consent rather than submission to eliminated alternatives. The most damning evidence of our systematic oppression is found in who actually receives the right to die in this country. Both convicted murderers and dogs have access to peaceful death that is denied to law abiding citizens. The state will execute a criminal with careful medical supervision using peaceful pharmaceutical methods, then criminally prosecute any doctor who provides identical care to a cancer patient begging for relief. This perverse hierarchy violates the fundamental principle of self ownership. The Supreme Court defined slavery in Plessy versus Ferguson as involuntary servitude, a state of bondage, the ownership of mankind as chattel, or at least the control of labor and services of one man for the benefit of another, and the absence of the legal right to the disposal of his own person, property, and services. By this definition, every American is a slave. The state has taken ownership of your life through regulatory prohibition of a peaceful death while refusing to provide remuneration for the taking of said life. This book represents a compelling case for socialism as a logical consequence of the government seizure of our lives. When a state eliminates your ability to withdraw consent through peaceful death, it becomes responsible for maintaining the existence it forces you to continue. If the government insists on owning your life to serve public purposes, it must assume all obligations that ownership entails, including providing everything necessary to make your own existence serve your welfare rather than simply generating benefits for others. Because the judiciary has proven itself unworthy of our respect, the public actively supports your oppression, and the government is acting beyond its legitimate authority. This book promotes direct action, civil disobedience, and jury nullification as the only viable path forward. The right to medical assistance in dying will not be won through appeals to institutions that benefit from your captivity. It will be won through underground networks that provide compassionate assistance regardless of legal permission. I am releasing this book on December 15th because that is the day the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. It is fitting that a book about reclaiming our most fundamental right should be released on the anniversary of when Americans first attempted to secure individual liberties against governmental overreach. The Bill of Rights was meant to protect us from exactly this kind of tyranny which this book exposes. the transformation of individual human beings into property of the state. I want you to look forward to this book because it will give you the intellectual tools to understand and resist your own oppression. This is not just another academic exercise or philosophical debate. This is a manual for liberation from the most comprehensive form of control ever devised. When you understand that your life belongs to you and not the collective, you recognize that the right to medical assistance in dying is the foundation for all other freedoms. When you see through the gaslighting that transforms rational responses to oppression into mental illness, that's when your real liberation begins. I am still in the process of developing the final book cover design, as the cover probably won't be the one I will ultimately use, but the content is almost ready. 15 chapters of uncompromising analysis that will change how you understand freedom, autonomy, and your relationship to the state. This book will show you why the judiciary is unworthy of your respect, how the courts transform your natural rights into state regulated privileges, and how to build real power through direct action that serves human dignity rather than institutional delusions of control. Mark your calendars for December 15th, the anniversary of the Bill of Rights, when Whose Life Is It? Without the Right to Die, You Don't Actually Own Your Life becomes available. This book will force you to confront what freedom actually means when the ultimate choice remains beyond your control. Thank you for listening to the Black Anarchist podcast. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The struggle is real, and the fight for liberation is far from over. Get sovereign or die trying.